This whip and my kinsmen will destroy you someday. From this day on, the Belmont clan will hunt the night!
So, Lament of Innocence. I vividly remember a time where even the sole idea of a 3D Castlevania was considered heresy. And that sentiment was probably caused by the apparent failure of Castlevania 64, which is another game I'm interested in revisiting at some point because I remember enjoying it, until I got access to the internet and saw how it got nothing but hate. And then it happened again with the game we're going to talk about today. Castlevania Lament of Innocence. An ideal game for the spooky season, even if the game is not really spooky unless you really are scared of anime twinks. At first I wanted some kind of dramatic title like In Defense of 3D Castlevanias, but after doing research online, both near the release in 2003 and today, Lament of Innocence does not seem hated at all. I even found people throwing all those esoteric terms that gaming YouTube likes so much, like hidden gem or underrated masterpiece. But instead of running these buzzwords even further into the ground, let's just start playing and see if my memories hold up. Oh, before we start, I changed the spoken language to Weave. It's pretty neat when that option is available, especially on an older game like this. I hope no one is too attached to the English voiceover. The prologue is a pretty long text, accompanied by illustrations made by series veteran Ayami Kojima. And don't get me wrong, as usual, these illustrations are pretty damn good, but I would have preferred something more dynamic for storytelling, like comic panels or simple 3D animations, because this is a very dry, long text dump. To make the long story short, Leon and Matthias are best buddies, but tragedy strikes when Matthias' wife dies suddenly, leaving him broken and bedridden. At around the same time, Leon's future wife is kidnapped by a powerful vampire. Since the church is busy with the Crusades, Leon leaves the order and runs alone into the Forest of Eternal Night. The game being set in the early 11th century makes this the first game in the official timeline, making the lesser-known Game Boy game Castlevania Legends non-canon. Leon finds and befriends the alchemist Rinaldo, who lives in a house near the castle. Rinaldo tells the story of the vampire Walter. I was going to laugh at a vampire lord being named Walter, but apparently there are a couple of vampire Walters in other media, so I'm gonna let that go. It seems that Walter finds entertainment in having vengeful guests, so Rinaldo is allowed to stay and assist them. Leon receives the classic Castlevania whip, and also has his gauntlet enchanted to absorb magical attacks. In a bit of a meta moment, Rinaldo explains that we have to defeat 5 monsters to open the way, because for Walter, this is a game. After a brief walk, the castle opens and we can go inside. When we gain control, the first thing we are going to notice is that the camera is fixed. Now, the game plays just fine with it, but it brings 2 major problems. The first is that you will get attacked from off-camera with very little recourse to avoid it. I found this happens rarely because enemy AI is just not aggressive enough most of the time, but when it does, it can be pretty annoying. But my bigger problem with it is that whenever you enter a new room, the perspective tends to shift, and I immediately become disoriented. If you watch the recording sessions, you can see how I am checking the map every 10 seconds or so. Of course, if you have been on this channel before, you probably know I could get lost in a well-lit hallway, so take that criticism with a grain of salt. On the castle's main hall, we can go through this little tutorial circuit that will teach us the game's basics. The first thing we're going to notice is that the jumping is very stiff, and using the whip to grab ledges is incredibly awkward. Thankfully, it doesn't come up very often, but it's certainly a headache when secret hunting. I might make memes about it, but it is a real problem. The combat tutorials are everything you might expect for an action game. Light and heavy combos, guarding, and dodging. There is also a special section to teach you how to absorb magic to use relics. And can I just say how refreshing it is to play an action game that completely escapes the played-out Dark Souls design paradigms. It's so refreshing, man. The game also predates the release of God of War, so it can't fall into the trite God of War clone label that a lot of games had to deal with back then. On the other end of the castle hall, we will access the stage selection room. There are 5 of them, and they can be completed in whatever order we want. I just picked them randomly. Every stage follows the same template. You move between small rooms, and every once in a while the exits will close down and force you to fight. Other times you'll be able to move freely even if enemies are nearby. The game kinda has a hidden experience system, because after a certain amount of kills you'll unlock new moves and combos, but it's hard to tell when you will learn something new. Every stage has its own version of closed doors and switches to open them. In this case, rooms with a giant switch you have to stand in. Very standard Castlevania stuff by this point. And talking about classic Castlevania elements, you can also find spots to change your sub-weapon that uses hearts as a resource, just like in the older NES games. This stage in particular also has nice reminders that every room might have verticality in it, so jumping everywhere and looking at the ceiling might reveal hidden things. There's also this particular jump I felt like showing because it was the first time I thought, oh, I probably need some special boots or something to reach that platform. Let's put a pin on that. I'll come back to this later in the video. When we enter this other room, we'll be greeted by the classic Castlevania enemy, the Fleaman. This game has a healthy enemy variety, and that's a big plus. Eventually, we'll navigate some trapped rooms and activate all the switches to open the closed door. There are a handful of rooms that have tests of skill like this. Despite the awkward jumping, they are not that difficult to overcome. It looks like I actually picked the most complicated stage of the 5 to start. This puzzle with the statues is probably the most complex in the whole game, and I basically just brute forced my way through it. I have no idea what the logic was, I just kept trying until I got it. After yet another trap room with moving lasers, we'll finally find the boss door. The parasitic worm might be the lamest boss in the game. It consists of destroying the weak spots on the floor while evading the actual worm. There's a bit of a random aspect to the fight because it's very difficult to know what direction the worm is going to take, and he's fast enough to enter the screen from a blind spot and run you over. Despite the game being on the easy side, it's pretty normal to die a couple of times. The devs are pretty generous with the save points, so there's never a problem running back to try again. After the boss goes down, we'll get the blue orb and a teleporter back to Rinaldo's house. We can buy several items in Rinaldo's shop, including healing potions, armor, and teleporting tickets. Nothing else to do but return to the stage select room in the castle. When starting the next level, you're probably thinking, wow, this looks very samey, and you would be absolutely right. The game does have different environments, but they are used very sparingly. On this stage, instead of the switches, we'll have to push these statues until they click and open the closed door. A bit further in, we'll meet this new Resident Evil-esque enemy called the Evil Stabber that can only be heard when it leaves the underground. Other notable enemies are the annoying flying gargoyles that can inflict paralysis on you, and the giant flowers that produce poison and move really quickly. While exploring, I did find a ring, and this is the perfect time to point out that you can only change equipment and use restorative items by using the quick menu. So the actual pause menu is kind of useless. Also, a neat thing is that the orbs we get by killing bosses can also be equipped, and what they do is affect how sub-weapons work. This expands their functionality exponentially, but I just stuck to using the blue orb access for 95% of the game. Yeah. Near the end, this room almost fools me, but thankfully I realized the statues can be destroyed with a normal whip. Finally, we will reach Medusa, or well, the Castlevania version of Medusa that's just a floating head. Medusa can stun you, and thankfully the recovery has very forgiving immunity frames. Look at that, if this was Dark Souls, that charge would have killed you and your entire family. While the fight is overall pretty easy, every boss has attacks that are very deceptively strong, especially when they are close to death. Don't feel bad if you die a couple of times. After you get used to it, you'll have no problem completing the fight and having a nice chat with Medusa.
その無知はリナルドの無知だ。伝説の化け物といえども効果があるらしいな。これほどの力はなかった。まさか完全体に。完全体?
If we go to chat with Rinaldo now, we'll get a scene about how the whip has not reached full power yet. But this is pretty upsetting for the old man. That's some pretty heavy-handed foreshadowing right there. The next stage is the laboratory, and damn, that's some funky music. The soundtrack is composed by another series veteran, Michiru Yamane. That's one based old lady. On this stage, I also saw for the first time the classic red skeletons. They are basically invincible and are just there to annoy. I also have to confess that I missed a ton of secrets here. I kinda just gave up trying. But don't worry because we'll return here at some point. The boss room is actually pretty close, but the gimmick of this stage is finding the special item that will activate the boss. Shortly after completing this little platforming session, we'll reach the special item. I decided to walk back and save some money. Those teleport tickets are pretty expensive. The resulting golem boss fight is pretty easy to understand, but it can hit very hard if you're not careful. My only objection here is that the camera becomes an issue during the second phase because the boss can only be heard from a certain angle. Time to pick up the next orb and continue onwards. Rinaldo has no new dialogue for now, so let's just go right ahead to the next stage. And this is the sewer level. This is just the sewer level. Traditionally the worst level of every game, and you know what? It ended up being the most annoying one for me. Right at the start, we'll be introduced to another classic, the fishmen. At least you won't die when you touch water this time. The overall objective of this level is stopping the flow of water to open the final door and finding the mechanism that lowers the bridge and allows access to the final boss. I didn't really have too much trouble finding this, but I still got a bit lost and kept using the wrong entrance. Also, I did feel a bit of a difficulty spike because this was the first and only time I died outside of a boss. Retreading the ground after my death was very aggravating, and those rooms with swinging access really made sure I didn't rush through. On this stage's lower floor, we'll actually fight a mid-boss, the doppelganger. This guy can be a handful, and it certainly drained my resources. When it gets low on health, it will run away. It's also worth mentioning that there are some spots like this one that just give you a sewer ride, and you might end up in a place you didn't intend to go, so be careful when entering strange skulls. This is also the first stage where I found one of the 5 keys. Again, this is something we'll revisit later. In a specific place in the sewers, there's this very obvious fake wall that you can open by baiting the big armor enemy into attacking. But despite going through and finding this little area, I completely missed the treasure hidden at the top. Yet another place we'll have to return later. After finally activating everything and going through the correct door, we'll finally find the boss of this stage, the vampire Joachim. Thankfully, it didn't take long to figure out the gimmick of this fight. You have to turn off the flames on the wall and make the boss vulnerable. However, not only is the boss very strong and the flames well protected, but the window of opportunity for attacking is pretty narrow. This was the first time I actually felt forced to lock in and practice all those offensive combos to do as much damage as possible. Before dying, Joachim drops more key lore about the Ebony Stone and the Sun Stone. Back at Rinaldo's shop, he has many things to say about the magic stones. They will come into play eventually, but not right now.
漆黒の石は聞いた。真紅の石の力とはどういうものなんだ？
わしも詳しくは知らん。ヴァンパイアの魂を力に変えるものだと聞いている。
Pretty nice furnishings on this stage, probably one of the best looking in the whole castle. Worth a mention are this new brand of traps. The stacked dragon heads that shoot at you are another Castlevania classic, and they managed to make them even more annoying. The only way to turn them off is by looking in their direction. In this other puzzle room, we have to bait the cannon fire to break all the statues. And another nice trap are these falling spikes. And thank you for making them really weak, because I always get clipped a couple of times in these rooms. And for yet another gimmick, we have rooms without light, where we have to complete a jumping sequence in near total darkness. Falling means starting from the beginning, and Leon's cry is kinda funny. This is all well and good, but come on man, I can see the floor before the camera resets. That's a pretty cheap effect. The rest of the stage is pretty straightforward, and what we have to do is find the bell. Return to the boss room and use it with the quick menu. This will activate a cinematic.
想像するだけでゾクゾクするわ。さあ、一緒に楽しみましょう。
Other than her multiplication gimmick, the succubus fight doesn't really stand out. It's time to pick up the orb and leave this place. When we return to Rinaldo, we'll get another scene where he explains his backstory and the reason he's there.
いや、それは違う。
何がだ？
あなたの思いを背負うことで、私はもっと強くなれる。ありがとう。礼を言う。
Back at the castle, the 5 lights are activated and we can finally enter the final section. As soon as we step in, a new cinematic will play. Walter will be holding Sarah and Leon leaps to start a fight, but the whip is ineffective. After a little dialogue, he will return her to us, which seems a little suspicious. Leon takes Sarah to Rinaldo's cabin, but she gets choked like a streamer's dog.
You're being such a baby.
Rinaldo attends to her, but afterwards he speaks with Leon. The barrier that protects the cabin activated because Sarah has been bitten and will turn into a vampire soon.
何を言ってるんだ。そんなはずは。
隠しても仕方のないことだ。率直に言う。あの娘はヴァンパイアに汚染されている。
嘘だ。そんなこと。
Without a way to beat Walter, things seem to be completely lost, but then Rinaldo drops the biggest twist in the game. In order to create the ultimate weapon against Walter, a tainted soul has to be sacrificed.
何を言ってるんだ。
無知を完全なものにすれば奴を滅ぼせるはずだ。だがそのためには汚れた魂が必要だ。それもお前と信頼し合える魂がな。
私はサラを助けるために全てを捨てたのだ。そんなことできるはずがない。
Sarah feels her humanity slipping away and decides to take one for the team. This all culminates with the creation of the legendary vampire killer whip. I remember this part completely blowing me away when I originally played the game all those years ago. And you know what? It still holds up pretty well.
ありがとう、レオン。
Once that's done, it's time to enter the Pagoda of the Misty Moon, the final stage of the game. And I know what you might be thinking, a final stage so soon? Universally, the most common complaint is that the game is really short. 5 stages that last around 40 minutes each, plus a final stage that is not much longer. The average player doing a non-completion run is looking at around 7 hours. An experienced player can probably do it in under 5. After wandering the final stage a bit, I decided to leave because I wanted to get things I never got on my original run. I didn't go for a perfect 100%, but do you know what the most important items are?
Say the line!
I'm interested in this.
When finding and unlocking hidden things, you have to ask yourself the question, skill issue or need an item? Turns out, to my complete shame, it's more of the former. The first order of business was getting all 5 special keys, and a total of 3 different magic whips. These new weapons also have mid-boss battles associated with them. In the gardens, you can use the flower enemies as platforms to reach new doors that don't show on the map. One of those will eventually lead to the Thunder Boss room. Remember those caves I found earlier? I missed this platform that led directly to the Ice Boss. But to be fair, some of those jumps have to be done practically blind. And remember that one part where I just gave up trying to climb? The door to the fire boss was right there. I probably should have gotten all of those on my first go. They don't really require anything special. The bosses themselves are pretty simple, and by that point I was a bit overpowered. The whips do more damage to enemies with elemental weaknesses, but the true use is to open a couple of doors and destroy some obstacles. As far as other power-ups go, I only picked up the bare minimum. Behind the blue door on the gardens, you can get the tool bag, a straight upgrade that allows you to equip 3 accessories. Behind the red door, you can find the boots that will allow you to sprint and jump farther, obligatory to discover a couple of secrets. The boots were actually necessary to pick up my relic of choice, the Innocence. It's just a heal over time, pretty useful, and I don't want to worry about using relics for damage. Also, this jump is kinda bullshit. Who knew you could change directions in midair by doing this? Sorry, I just had to mention it. Well, now that I feel ready, let's press on. The first half of the pagoda is very direct and quick. We'll find yet another laser room and we'll notice pretty quickly that all enemies are stronger than normal. Halfway through, we'll have a rematch with the doppelganger. It's funny because I remember having real trouble with him the first time I played, but now I got him on the first try. A little further in, it did take an embarrassing amount of time to notice the Mirage skeleton gimmick. It almost felt like another mid-boss. And after hopefully the last laser room, we'll find the stairs to the second floor. And then we will hear what I believe the kids call peak. Of course, the door to Walter's main room needs a key, but to get the key you need to open another magic door, and to do that you need a special item. But this item doesn't work unless you change it in a special room. With the modified item you can open the door, pick up the key, and finally pay a visit to Walter. This whole process means that there might be a lot of backtracking, but the map layout is pretty clever and you probably have more than enough teleport tickets to make it more convenient. We can finally walk up the stairs and start the final sequence. After a cool and brief confrontation, we'll start the fight, and when we hit Walter once, things will stop for another short cinematic. After that, the fight starts for real.
NANI?! これでお前を守る者はなくなった。サラとの約束、今ここで果たす。
The best approach I found for the fight was waiting until he attacks and then dodge and counterattack quickly with the best combos you can, being careful not to get too greedy. It kinda reminds me of the original NES fight when I think about it. When his health gets low, he'll add new attacks, especially this explosion where the only thing you can do is run away. After Walter goes down, we'll be visited by another Castlevania regular, Death.
Masaka!
He takes Walter's soul and the other twist appears on screen. Besides the text intro, Matthias had only been mentioned a couple of times at most. Turns out, he's the one that owns the Crimson Stone. By using Walter's soul, he can turn into a powerful vampire. In essence, this is the birth of Dracula. Matthias attempts to turn Leon to his side, but he's the goodest of boys, he wouldn't do that, so Matthias gets pissy and leaves. This all leads into the final battle with Death. And this fight, not my favorite, I'm gonna say that. Death hangs out at the edge of the scenario while shooting different attacks, and he's a bit of a sponge. The most important part of this fight was the extra attack he gains after he reaches the halfway point. He shoots 2 fireballs with really good tracking that leave shockwaves. You can evade them by jumping, but if you get clipped, there is a good chance you're going to eat shockwaves as well, dealing a lot of damage. It's also worth mentioning that if you die here, you have to go through the Walter fight all over again. After Death's defeat, Leon promises that his clan will fight evil forever, starting the legend of the Belmonts.
必ず追い詰めてみせる。今より 我がベルモンド一族は夜を狩る一族となる。
The sun finally comes out in the forest again and the credits roll. In the after credits, you can see the advertisement. You can buy this new DLC for $19.99. Okay, I'm kidding. All the extras are in the game disc. What a revolutionary idea. You gain access to a new mode to play the game as Chakim, and a new hard difficulty mode. I didn't do either. And that's it. No, wait, that's not it. There's still a couple of things left to mention. Hidden in the depths of the castle, there's one extra boss. All we need is the special item we can find in the Pagoda. However, I decided to get extra equipment for this fight, and I ended up finding something that I didn't expect. A lot of the accessories are not found, they are farmed. And there's a couple of them that increase the luck stat precisely to help you do this. It took around 1 hour to farm the 3 accessories I wanted, which was more forgiving than I thought. They are mostly to protect from status effects and other defensive stuff. Thanks to this farming, I also got a lot of money, which I used to buy a diamond and demonstrate the game's most famous cheat, the item duplication glitch. It also has been speculated that this might be some kind of debug option for testing purposes, but it's hard to know for sure. What you have to do is stand on this exact spot and enter the item menu. Every item you highlight with the cursor will duplicate. Once we have tons of diamonds, we can sell them to Rinaldo for an exorbitant amount of money, and use that to buy the best armor in the game, among other things. Now, after all that, we can use the key on the door that is right next to the main teleporters. After we go down a long spiral staircase, we'll reach a room with a save point and a door leading to the prison of eternal torture. This is a long 3-phase fight, and like the final boss, dying means you have to start over. In the first phase, you have to jump and slowly tear his body apart, while the floor keeps filling up with worms. This is easy, but if you have already died a couple of times, this phase is just here to irritate you. The second phase is probably the hardest, because it's really difficult to predict and avoid the arm. The third and final phase has a high damage output, but the gimmick of hiding behind the rocks is a bit easier to handle. At the end of the fight, you'll get the Black Orb, which is kind of an underwhelming reward, especially if you don't really depend on sub-weapons. And that's it. Castlevania Lament of Innocence is done. Do you have any games you love that at the same time you have many criticisms for? This is one of those for me. The fixed camera, the fact that all stages have practically no connection between them, the lack of environment variety, the game being so short, these are all problems. But at the end of the day, I miss games that are not overbloated. The story and characters are simple but charming, and the gameplay goes down smooth and feels refreshing. I'm happy to say that not only does it hold up, I think I like it a little bit more now. As far as the masterpiece allegations go, yeah, not quite. Still good though. I did want to play this game alongside the other PS2 Castlevania, but I wasn't gonna make it in time for my self-imposed deadline, so I cut it out. The game is definitely on the docket for the future, I'm just not sure exactly when. Do all the YouTube things you want, I'm not gonna force your hand. And having said that, see you on the next one.